Hi everyone, Josh from the Narrate team here. In week 4 of Narrate's series on emotions, Help, I Feel, Adam draws insight from the Bible, as well as from the work of lead thinkers on living an optimal life, and asks the question, what if we can't live a full life without experiencing negative emotion?
Hi, you guys. We really do have the gift of cynicism that just keeps on giving, don't we, around here? It's awesome. So to get started this morning, I'd like you to take a moment and just catalog whatever and all negative emotion, kind of thoughts, angers, frustrations, impatience, all the negative stuff. I just want you to take inventory of that, will you? Okay. So if you could eliminate anything from the world, anything. Now, okay, let's first of all say it's got to be specific. You can't say sin, even though that would be great. You're not Jesus, so you don't get to do that. But like if you could eliminate any single thing, any single malady, any single organization, what would you eliminate? Just get rid of one thing. What would you get rid of? Cancer, I suppose, would be a common comment, and rightly so. Maybe for you it's of the more psychological, maybe depression. You'd get rid of that. Maybe there's an addiction that you struggle with, and you'd want to get rid of that one. Maybe there's a particular organization that you think we'd all be better off if they disappeared. Maybe like ISIS or perhaps the Oakland Raiders. Maybe you'd want to get rid of them. If you get rid of anything, maybe it's your anger or your frustration, what would you get rid of? One thing. This morning I really just want to ask one question. What if we could dissect you and get deep inside, what if the most honest part of yourself would rather get rid of a certain negative emotion than anything? Yeah, we don't like ISIS, but what honestly, what if you could get rid of anything and nobody could judge you for it and nobody else had to know? What if for you the answer is your anxiety or your frustration, your anger? And what if... And we're going to come at this from several different angles, but here's the question that I want to get you stirring on this morning. What if doing that would actually result in your being less healthy? What if removing the single most negative experience, the most negative, emotion you have, that thing that maybe you're getting clinical help for, maybe you're seeing a therapist for, maybe it's why you're reading your Bible, maybe it's why you're here, maybe you've never talked with anybody, but what if actually getting rid of your negative emotion associated with your anger would actually be the worst thing you could possibly do for yourself? Now, if you haven't been with us maybe ever before, or even if you have, what we're doing this morning is picking up a series we started way back in July. Isn't that weird to say way back in July? That's what I love about Helena, though, is the seasons, and we're in this new season, and love it. So we started this series called Help, I Feel, and I think more than anything else, this series has been a confession. It's been an acknowledgement of like, wow, yeah, I feel. And part of what we've been trying to explore is that God made us that way. That Jesus, he was profoundly emotive in his being. What we've tried to explore is that being healthy, no matter what your schematic for healthy is, doesn't necessarily mean being emotionally detached or not feeling things. It means understanding that you feel things. It means being able to put specific words to what it is you're feeling, and then exploring to an even greater degree what happens if you understood your feelings and you could keep your feelings from sabotaging your behavior. Like what happens in that instance? And then more recently we talked about our future and feelings and all of that. But seriously, like the degree to which this has been helpful to you, I'll bet it's not your positive emotions, is it? Like no one's like, hey, what am I going to do with all this joy? What am I going to do with this incredible sense of satisfaction? Like I feel so purposeful. What do I do with that? I feel so loved. That's not the issue, is it? The issue is the negative emotion, isn't it? And here's the question again. Because I wonder, some of you follow Jesus, some of you don't. That's great. That we're trying to create a context where that's safe for all. I wonder how much of your existence is about eliminating the negative, built on the assumption that would be a good thing. And what if that's wrong? You know, many of you business-minded people, you love the old adage, up and to the right? We've even got this graph, up and to the right. And I think this is I like it as a way of thinking. It's relative, I think. It can be a healthy thing. It can be an unhealthy thing. It can drive you to make more money, which can be a good thing. It can be a bad thing. It can drive you to become a better person. It can also drive you to have more sex with more people. I mean, up and to the right is kind of relative. But here's my question. What if What if the inability to experience negative emotion, what if it would actually hinder any potential for growth that you may have? There's a particular doctor by the name of Ed Deasy. Now, I wasn't familiar with him until I was listening to an HBR interview of one of his students. Ed Deasy, it turns out, is this renowned psychiatrist. I don't know his spiritual persuasion. That's why I was fascinated by his research. Because Ed Deasy has this, he spent his lifetime, and the more you understand him, he has TED Talks, and you can Google him, and he has books. He's kind of the precursor to this whole happiness movement and understanding human thriving and the conditions on which we're the most healthy. Well, there was a student who was aspiring to teach with him, to learn under him. He was an aspiring graduate student. And in being an aspiring student, he filled out numerous applications and wrote essays. And finally, the moment came where he got to sit down with this renowned doctor. The doctor looked at him, and after exchanging the initial kind of superficial exchanges, the doctor looked at him and said, "So talk to me about happiness." Now, in that, what he was referring to was that this student had submitted an essay all about happiness, knowing that Dr. Deasy was all about human thriving. This man wanted to study under him because he wanted to study human happiness. He recognized that was one of the greatest desires of humanity out there, and so he wanted to become an expert on it. And so after summarizing his research found in this very dense essay, finally there was this silent pause. And when Dr. Deasy finally got a chance to respond to his summary of his essay, Dr. Deasy looked at him and said, excuse the language, "I think happiness is a bunch of crap." Now, this aspiring student, Ron Friedman was his name, was as shocked to hear him say that as maybe you or me. And what was confounding to him was it didn't make sense. It was paradoxical to the way he understood the doctor. But in fact, he did get the invitation to study with him. And in fact, over the next several years of his doing so, he became very familiar with Dr. Deasy's research. See, Dr. Deasy's conviction is that we as a people are prone to be so overly preoccupied with happiness and the emotions that we get when we're happy that we actually look past the incredible corrective value of negative emotion. He acknowledges that feeling negative emotion is terribly uncomfortable. But his point and his research demonstrates over and over and over again that when we're preoccupied with happiness, when we equate a negative emotion with bad, something's wrong, this isn't right, if I was healthy, I wouldn't have it. When we do that, he says, we miss out on this incredible gift that negative emotions are. And of course, you're probably a step ahead of me. The gift is what? We see things in our environment that aren't right. Negative emotion prompts us to opportunities for growth. He points out that if we blunt our inability to experience sadness, the result of that is we think we're abnormal when we are. And further, the result of that is that the signal that's intended to send to those around us who love us that we need help, it's blunted as well. He points out that when you feel something like guilt, we have a couple options there. We can tell ourselves when we look in the mirror that we're great and wonderful and there's nothing wrong and they were in the wrong anyway, so don't feel guilty. He said, or you can recognize it as a signal telling you there's a relationship in your life that's not right. Go deal with it. Go make it right. Funny that we follow a rabbi who said, hey, just drop everything when you come to that realization. Like, get out of church, stop reading your Bible, go make it right. He points out that anger is intended to tell us that we feel slighted, that we've identified that something that's not right and we have to do the work there. In fact, Ron Friedman, who has studied under him now for years and is his own expert on this, he points out that actually in our culture, we have a word for the person who is perpetually happy. We use it on a regular basis. That word? Psychopath. That's who only has positive emotion. In fact, Ron Friedman, in a fascinating book that's worth your time, it's on the notes page, says this: incessant cheerfulness is abnormal, unhealthy, and counterproductive. My question is this, see, because we kind of get this and we go, yeah, I get that's true. I'm not asking you if you know that's true, like in your head. I guess the question that I'm trying to pose to us is, in your processing of life, in the comings and goings of circumstances, how much energy is dedicated to avoiding negative experience? This whole thing to me has a parallel to the way we understand creativity. I think this is a place filled with people who have an appreciation for creativity and that understand that creativity isn't reserved for the fine arts and even the musical arts, but that it goes everywhere. That a successful realtor, a successful doctor, that they're creative. That you can have a creative spreadsheet as an accountant. Like creativity is this brilliant thing. But what makes creativity work? Does creativity work best when there is unbounded opportunity and resource? Like, are you at your most creative when you're chock full of energy and everything's perfect and there's no challenges in the world? Or does creativity work best when there's restraint, when there's limitation? There's a guy by the name of Austin Kleon who's done some marvelous work on this in a book called Steal Like an Artist, which is also very permissive because it affirms the gift of plagiarism that so many of you hold but most of us hide. He tells the story, I think the one that illustrates it best is the story of a familiar person in your life. You've read his book, even if you don't read books. It's by a guy named Dr. Seuss. In 1954, Life magazine published a very serious scholarly article that was bemoaning really the downturn in adolescent and in childhood reading, that the challenge to childhood literacy was that the literature available to them was so darn boring. It talked about how it was teaching them the right words, but the stories weren't engaging and nobody wanted to read them. It literally picks on the book Dick and Jane, which I didn't even know was a real book. I just thought that was a joke, pointing holes at that style of literature. So the challenge of the article was heard by a local aspiring publisher. He did some research. He learned that at this stage in a child's development, there's about 400 words that they ought to know and they should be able to own, sight words, we may call them now. And so he called up a friend that we know as Dr. Seuss and issued a challenge. He challenged him to write a piece of literature using only those 400 words, no more, but that it would be a piece of literature that kids would actually want to read, that they wouldn't put it down. Dr. Seuss wrote a book that we all know as The Cat in the Hat. He used 256 of those 400 words, and that publisher saw yet another opportunity. Seeing how restraint was giving birth to creativity, the publisher bet Dr. Seuss $50 that he couldn't write a book that only used 50 distinct words. Dr. Seuss heard the challenge. He came back with a book. What do you suppose it's called? Green Eggs and Ham. A book that uses no more than 50 distinct words. Turns out the publisher didn't pay up on his bet, but Dr. Seuss gets the last laugh. Now here's my only point in all of that. What if negative emotion is to your desire to thrive and grow what constraint is to creativity? We know that the best solutions aren't born when there are no obstacles. They're born when there's lots of obstacles. What if your pursuit of being happy, whatever that word means in your understanding, what if there's a counterintuitive nature to it? What if the negative, what if you can't thrive without experiencing negative emotion? You know, this is an idea that of a man very close to Jesus explored, and I think, to be honest with you, it's one of those verses, one of those ideas that I've read 1,000 times, but until I ran into Dr. Deasy's work, I totally missed it, which is why I love the way the sciences open up God's revelation as I understand it. James, this author that we're going to talk about, just a little bit of context, James was the half-brother of Jesus. We call him the half-brother because they shared a biological mother, but of course an Orthodox Christ follower would say they didn't share a biological father because Joseph wasn't Jesus' biological father. What's fascinating to me about the story of James, maybe this is trivial, but James, by all accounts, wasn't a follower of Jesus. In fact, he was one of Jesus' louder critics up until the resurrection, which is weird to me because, like, we can all appreciate, right? Like, you can impress me and I can impress you, but that's because we don't live together. It's hard to impress a sibling or a spouse, right? I mean, it's because you know somebody. Weird to me that Jesus' own brother wouldn't have went like, this guy is perfect. Something unique. I can't explain that. But what takes me off that edge of asking all kinds of unorthodox questions, I suppose, is the fact that as dramatic as that was, the whole thing turned 180 degrees when Jesus' resurrection happened. Because suddenly one of Jesus' loudest critics became this crazy, ardent follower of his, which to me underlines, highlights, puts exclamation points next to the fact that the resurrection, that Jesus' whole movement was founded not upon an idea, but upon a historical moment. Well, in that moment, Jesus became the leader of this local Jerusalem church. And I don't entirely understand why. And invariably, part of his celebrity status had something to do with it. But James was in charge of leading a very unique church because the Jewish people were profoundly hated by the Romans from the get-go. They were a minority in the truest sense of the word, abused, taken advantage of. They were marginalized in every sense. And then from that Jewish subculture, you had an even smaller subculture called the Jews who believed in Jesus, this messianic Jesus movement. And so they were hated all the more. But interestingly enough, the Jews who didn't follow Jesus hated those who did as much as the Romans hated the both of them. And so historically, in those first few decades, the situation was terrible. I dare say that the situation with ISIS really had nothing on it. You had all this fighting and all this persecution and all this limiting of resources. Poverty was very much an issue. In fact, the historical suggestion of James's writing would be that the New Testament church, they were murdering their Jewish kin and justifying that in the name of following Jesus, and vice versa. And so you've got this incredibly tumultuous kind of tinderbox situation. And James writes them a letter. Now, presumably, this isn't the first time he's heard it, but here's the beginning of his challenge to them. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Now, dare we say it, but is that not the most trite thing you could ever say to somebody suffering? I mean, seriously, please don't go to your friends to the waiting room in the hospital where a friend has just learned that someone's died and say, hey, you should be happy about this. And I think it's worth noting that what James isn't saying here is this is good. But he's saying there's something that can come from it that will be good. Now the question is why? Let's continue in verse 3. Because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Now, again, I know we've stepped deep into cliche things that Christians say, but just stick with me for 10 minutes. What if James didn't just want these early Christ followers to exist? What if he didn't just want them to be present? What if he wanted them to thrive? What if he didn't just want them to make it, to survive? What if he wanted them to contribute, to have impact on the world? And what if James understood that would require that they be tough, that they be strong? N.T. Wright, in his commentary on this passage, has this brilliant picture where he suggests that we ought to think of ourselves like a house. And he says, the reason you put a window in a house is not because you decided that it'd be most economical and energy efficient to have a glass wall. He said, you put a window in your house to let light into the house. He says, we should think of ourselves like a house. And faith, he said, faith is what happens when we look out the window to a God who's much bigger, much more marvelous, and yet much more mysterious than any of us could ever claim to understand. In fact, N.T. Wright says, the moment that we come to this realization that we have a good description of God, we should be terrified. Because we should live in this conflicted reality that he is much larger than our constructions and understandings of him, and yet much better all the same. Faith, he says, is what happens when we look outside the windows to a God who's bigger. Patience or perseverance is what happens inside the house when we take a look at that God. What if God doesn't just want you to exist? What if he doesn't just want you to subscribe to certain Christian ideals? What if God is the king of audibles? Turns out it's not Peyton Manning. What if it's God? And he had this remarkable idea in the garden where he would be in close physical proximity to the people, and they would get to know him, Adam and Eve, much like any son or daughter ought to get to know their biological parents. And then this thing called sin happened, and the whole mess got disrupted, and God called an audible and went, wait a minute. I'm still going to let them get to know who I am and what I'm about. In fact, I'll leverage the very problem that was this created. I'll leverage their pain. Listen to the way James continues. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Maybe we could say it this way, that there's a way for God to turn your isms and your theology and your intellectual, cerebral musings about him, there's a way for him to turn them into a life, but it won't be easy. I heard Rob Bell say recently, God is not an argument to be won. You're trying to live a life. What if the type of truth God concerns himself with in your life has less to do with the academic and more to do with what it means to trust God through the seasons and the experiences and the challenges, not just the happiness and the joy, but the sorrow and the grief and the sadness and the fear, the frustration, the anger? You know, there's a moment when Jesus says something, and it's one of those classic moments that we use. It's like we might as well brand it to a baseball bat or the end of a bullet and shoot it at one another, because we beat one another up with this. Listen to what Jesus says in John 8. Go ahead. He says, "Then you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Let me ask you this. What's your understanding of the type of truth God wants for you? Is it the kind, dare I say, that's been represented by this kind of culture war, where we're arguing about facts? Or is it the kind that is this deep, profound, God, you're present in the pain too kind of knowing? The word there for truth, it's the word gnosis. So way back before Jesus was alive, the Hebrews found that their cultural, their written language had transitioned from Hebrew to Greek. And so a group of scribes set out to translate the Hebrew scriptures into the Greek language. We call it the Septuagint. We have these crazy volumes of it available to us still today. The word in Genesis, when it said Adam knew his wife Eve, is the same word Jesus uses here when he says, "You'll know the truth." Now, what is Genesis talking about? Like, he would know what color her hair was? Or what her favorite coffee was? Of course not. That's stupid. It's talking about the sexual experience, what the Bible holds as the most profound level of knowing. And Jesus says, hold on. I want you to know me. And that will set you free. Ever feel really stupid when you hear someone talk about God? Maybe it doesn't matter. Because the type of knowing, and certainly this can lead to something good, and I'm not saying there's no role in the academic and books, of course not. But what if God's interest for you is in a type of knowing that's altogether different than the one you originally sought? What if he's not into you knowing him through a purely mental capacity? What if God is aware, not an endorser of, but aware of the fact that life will be profoundly difficult, and it'll be most helpful if you knew him through those types of situations? What if God wants you to know him? What if he wants to turn your isms into something more than Christian paraphernalia? And I was having lunch recently with a dear friend, and this man he's in his 60s. I have as much respect for him as any person that I have a relationship with. I know him to be an incredible father, an incredible husband, a great leader. I have, like a lot of people, a great deal of respect for him. I also know that this man has chronic pain in the form of constant ringing in his ears and migraine headaches on a daily basis. Now, I've operated under the assumption since I've known that about him, that was the result of this physical injury that he had about a decade ago when he fell out of a tree into a seated position. That sounds fun, huh? And I don't even know how it came up. But I looked at him over lunch and I said, how long have you had migraine headaches? Like, can you imagine? In fact, I was in a meeting with him recently and there was a cricket in the house and it was the most horrendous sound. Like, it was like, and there was like a couple of us on the younger side of things and everyone else was just ignoring it. And finally, my friend and I were like, wait a minute. What is that sound? And he's like, oh, there must be a cricket. I usually can't hear it because my ears just ring all the time. What? I said to him, so how long have you had migraine headaches? He said, since 1978. That's the year I was born. I grabbed my phone and I took note and I was able to capture some of the crazy sports fetish that I have for the world. And I simply wrote down, all of us have to learn to play hurt. It's not just a football thing. Do you ever find yourself in the sense of like, God, like if I just didn't have these financial problems, I would bring you so much glory. God, if I didn't have cancer, God, if I didn't have anxiety, what if you're wrong? What if playing hurt is part of the game? What if everyone around you is dealing with something, overcoming something? What if the invitation of God is, hold on. Don't get me wrong, I don't like pain. It wasn't my plan. But could you trust me? In fact, let's just get real for a second. Because on the hypothetical, cerebral, like this is all so great and grand, and it's like watching the movie Rudy, like rah, rah, we all love an underdog. Let's just get real. What is it for you? If you could eliminate one emotion, one negative emotion, what would it be? I bet you have it. And if you're anything like me, if there was a pill to be had or a surgery to undergo, like sign me up. Here's the crazy radical suggestion of Jesus and of clinical science as we understand it today. That without that, you're not better, you're worse. Without that, things don't move up and to the right nearly as fast. Now that is either profoundly helpful or stupid. And what you do with that, that's what we call faith. Some of you are Christ followers and others of you not so much. What we know is that all of us enter into a relationship with Christ via some kind of crises. And sometimes it's intellectual, and sometimes it's very, very human. But the trick of this whole, are you a Christian, are you not, conversation is, we're choosing every day whether or not we're going to trust Jesus. And I'm not suggesting these deep, hypothetical, theological conversations there. I'm just saying, every day we're going, God, I hate that I'm experiencing this grief. God, if I could just get rid of this anxiety, if I could just get rid of, you go ahead, fill in the blank. Faith is looking out the window and trusting that somehow that is God's gift to you. Listen, I know that gets trite, but that you can leverage it to know him better. Let's just get personal. What is it? And are you choosing this kind of action? The surrendering, trusting, like, okay, Lord. Or something else. What if James wasn't being trite? What if James had crazy supernatural insight into the way the human experience works? And he understands that ever since the garden went wrong, the way he forms and shapes you to reflect his mysterious personhood to the world is through your pain. And what if it's not about always understanding it, but it is always about surrendering it? Let me pray for you, God. Lord, I think we all, there is solidarity around the idea that we are in a full-on sprint away from our negative emotion. God, we're aware of what it does to us. We're aware of the way it creates pain in the lives of others and ourselves. And yet, God, we're so thankful that the knowing you had in mind was altogether different than the kind that we can accomplish in a space like this. Thanks, Jesus, for the way you continually and constantly woo us to a deeper understanding of yourself. And God, I pray for friends and people here who their unknowing of you is caught up entirely in the intellectual questions that they have. God, I pray that you would reveal yourself to them through their pains and frustrations, their disappointments, their abuse, their hurts. God, it terrifies us that you want to know us so much, that you want us to know you to such a degree invite us to leverage our pain. God, would you give us a type of faith, God, that really does contribute to the common good. And that would start, God, with the emotional health that we have. We love you, Jesus. Amen.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.